I love weird games. I think my favourite games to cover are the middle chapters of big franchises where they get all experimental in their attempt to remain new and relevant. I have a lot of fun analysing and questioning the design choices and the legacy of these often more forgotten titles. Those are the games that tickle the critic part of my brain that's, for better and worse, always active. However, sometimes you don't need to complicate things. Sometimes a game doesn't need a dramatic development or a weird idea. Sometimes you just get to watch the masters at work. First Light was a perfect pitch. The developers of Hitman making a James Bond game? Duh! Obviously! 5 years ago, if you had asked anybody who should have the rights to James Bond, everybody would have told you, IO Interactive. It's a match made in heaven. The Hitman games, especially the World of Assassination trilogy, pretty much are Bond games. Aesthetically, the games borrow a ton from the movies. Thematically, they're dealing in the same circles of espionage and intrigue. And mechanically, they're not shooters. They are impeccably crafted murder sandboxes. I love Hitman, and the true fans will know that as of last year I'm something of a Bond aficionado, so this game had some high expectations to meet. And it absolutely shattered them. I love this game. I might love it even more than Hitman, and I really love Hitman. First Light feels like everything that a AAA game should be. It's gorgeous and finely polished. It's fun to play. It tells a fantastic story. It's just an absolute joy from start to finish, and I want to talk about it. So if you'll indulge me my very basic opinions, let's talk about 007 First Light. It's been 5 years since the last Bond movie and 14 years since the last Bond game, thanks to various licensing issues and the uncertain future that acquisition by Amazon poses for the franchise. But for First Light, this is nothing but positives. Unlike the movie tie-in games of the past, First Light has no allegiance to a particular version of Bond. We don't need to get a strange approximation of Daniel Craig in here. IO was free to do whatever they wanted with the character. What they chose to do, somewhat controversially, is an origin story, starting with a much younger Bond who's not quite the suave super spy we know and occasionally love. This is one of the things that I was most skeptical about when the game was being marketed. Does Bond work as a young man? Does James Bond still work at all? 5 years is enough time that the last Bond film feels quite distant, but not long enough that it's entered the nostalgia cycle. Especially since, while it was a vast improvement over Spectre, No Time to Die was a muddled movie, caught between influences on what Daniel Craig's Bond was supposed to be. Have we moved past Bond culturally? Is he too much a relic of the past? My fear was unfounded, and in retrospect it seems like a silly fear to have in the first place. The reason the Bond franchise has stuck around for over 60 years is its ability to reinvent itself. Bond, M, Q, Moneypenny, MI6. These are all pieces on a board that can be shuffled around and remoulded to fit into almost any story in any era. Does Bond still work in 2026? Of course he does, for the same reason he still works in 2006, or 1995, or 1985, or 1973, or 1962. Diamonds really are forever. Young Bond is a new take, but it's a new world, and modern problems require modern solutions. The Bond films rarely define action movies of the era, instead they borrow and adapt the trends of the era into a Bond shape. Moonraker was famously put into production to cash in on the Star Wars buzz, or the clear influences of Jason Bourne on Casino Royale. It's important to the identity of the franchise that the influences are not itself. Sure, there are Easter eggs and connections between all the movies, but each era of Bond has a very timely feeling to it. You could not make Die Another Day in any era apart from the early 2000s. First Light continues this legacy. It has plenty of little references and Easter eggs to the wider Bond canon, but it is a modern production with modern flourishes, drawing inspiration from the likes of Uncharted, the Batman Arkham games, Hitman, of course, and others, moulding them all into a Bond shape. There are definitely some movie influences too, the most interesting being Kingsman. Kingsman itself is a response to the somewhat dreary realism of the modern Bond films, which injected a lot of silly, campy colour back into the genre, which then very quickly spiraled into self-parody by the second movie, but the core idea was good. A pretty woman for men, where a young, lower-class chav is scooped up and taught how to be a gentleman super spy. In the movie, Colin Firth's Harry is the James Bond stand-in, the suave English gentleman spy, with Taron Egerton's Eggsy being the new blood. First Light flips this dynamic and puts James Bond into that Eggsy role, the naive, ambitious outsider entering the dark world of espionage, with a new character, John Greenway, filling the role of Harry. And it works so well. One of the most commonly praised parts of First Light is the tutorial, which is a crazy thing to say, but it's easy to see why. First Light does not view the tutorial as a necessary chore, but as a delightful opportunity for storytelling. The best stuff in Kingsman was Spy School, where Eggsy meets and competes with all these posh British brats in a series of escalating spy challenges. First Light brings it a little more down to earth, but it captures the tone perfectly. Bond is teamed up with two other recruits, Monroe and Cressida, and the trio have immaculate chemistry. The game's graphical fidelity allows for an amazing depth of expression in the characters' faces and body language, and the pacing of a video game allows for all the small character moments and interactions that wouldn't fit in a movie. The three of them get a flat to live in during training, and you get to explore the whole flat, get to know these people not just through conversations, but through their stuff. Monroe's trainer collection, Cressida's expensive toiletries that expose her as a nepo baby, and Bond's comparative lack of stuff, being an outsider to this world. These are the halcyon days, all the spectacle and excitement of the spy life, with none of the danger or the harsh realities. And the game runs that tone for just as long as it needs to. All of the actual mechanical tutorializing is hidden within character-driven montages. You quickly learn how to grapple during fights, cut to some driving, cut to some running, cut to some shooting, cut to some push-ups, cut back to more fighting. It doesn't feel like a tutorial, it feels like a training montage, which it is. It's both, and it's genius because by the end of it you do have a complete understanding of how the game works. You've just been taught it in bits, intercut with excellent character development and charming slice-of-life moments. The chapter introducing social stealth mechanics and some of the Hitman influence level design is a nightclub similar to another scene from Kingsman. The recruit's night out is interrupted by a secret test to root out a spy in the club. It's fun and cinematic despite the fact that there's no danger. Really, because of the fact that there's no danger. This is the pinnacle of the spy lifestyle. Living it up, going places you're not supposed to, flirting with beautiful women, and doing it all with your friends. This is the good life. But the thing about halcyon days is that they're only ever in the past. Chapter 3 is where the training wheels are dropped and the rest of the game starts to spill out. The recruits are called into an early assignment to find a rogue 00 agent in a luxury hotel in Slovakia. It's the closest the game gets to Hitman in terms of game design, visuals, and even some narrative beats. A big part of the mission involves tailing a tall, mysterious man who keeps changing disguises. Through this homage, it also showcases the vast difference between the two games. Hitman is all about freedom, and First Light is about the illusion of freedom. First Light is a very linear game that sometimes pretends it isn't, and I don't mean that as an insult. The game is very good at pretending. Much like a Telltale game, it's only on a subsequent playthrough that you see how illusionary your choices are. It's best to view the game as a road. Sometimes the road forks in the middle, but the two forks always meet back in the same place again to carry you into the next set piece. Take, for example, getting into the hotel. You can find a press pass to bluff your way in, you can climb up and around to come in the second floor window, or you can sneak past the guards to get in the first floor window. 3 paths that all lead you to the same place, the balcony overlooking the chess tournament. This is not true freedom, it's 3 doors to the same room, like the old cow meme. The point is not really to give you freedom, it's to get you thinking like Bond. It's not really about the path you take, it's about the hunt for those paths. The eavesdropping and studying of the environment that make you feel like a spy. Anyone coming in looking for James Bond Hitman is going to be disappointed, but I think this was the correct choice. The Hitman games bend to Agent 47 as a character, and in the same way, First Light bends to James Bond. I mentioned earlier the influence of the Arkham games, and while the game does have some meaty punch-ups, that's not really where the influence is. The reason the Arkham games were so revolutionary was their character-first approach to game design. Arkham Asylum took each aspect of Batman, his martial arts prowess, his mastery of stealth, his detective skills, and built the game outward from those core pillars. First Light does the same thing for James Bond. What are the core pillars of the Bond fantasy? He's a crack shot, sure, but that's only one of his many talents, and not really the most important one. The most memorable action sequences in a Bond film are the big bombastic set pieces or the brutal room-destroying punch-ups. And First Light commits to both. But another part of the fantasy is the luxury, staying in these glorious hotels, touring the most scenic places in the world, chatting up the locals for information on your targets. First Light is the only Bond game I can think of that isn't primarily a shooter. It's a good 3 to 4 hours into the game before you get your first genuine firefight. A lot of those older Bond games were limited in their time and budget, and so defaulted to a generic first or third person shooter format. First Light sits more comfortably between genres. There were very long stretches of the game with no combat, just walking around the world, gathering information and soaking in the atmosphere. But that fits with the pace of a Bond film much more than the constant action of an FPS. The action punctuates the chapter, it does not define the chapter. It is very good when it breaks out though. The melee combat is not super complicated, but it looks and feels fantastic. Hits feel forceful, and the destructible environment and the way the animations so often incorporate the environment feels so in keeping with the kinds of scraps Bond gets into in the movies. Bond can take a few hits, but he's not invincible. Generally, the quickest way to end a fight is to use the environment to your advantage, like throwing enemies into fire extinguishers, or over railings, or using a low ledge to do a vault attack. Pub rules, as Bond puts it, which is to say the only rule is to win. Fistfights have a low-key slapstick vibe which fits the tone just right. It never gets too silly, but you can chuck a coffee cup at a guy's head and then rugby tackle him off a railing. Firefights, when they do break out, have a desperate rhythm to them that I've never felt from a third-person shooter before, but that feels so in keeping with Bond. Bond doesn't have an infinite pool of ammo and generally enters a fight with only his dinky little service pistol. You have to make sure every shot counts and keep pushing forward so you can grab weapons as you go and use them up till they're empty. At which point you can huck them at a nearby enemy to give yourself a little advantage as they're stunned. Like the fist fights, there's also a big focus on using the environment to your advantage, since every bullet you can spare by blowing up the nearby fuel line is a bullet you can use later. Variety is the name of the game when it comes to linear action, and First Light has it in spades. Especially when it comes to the big action set pieces like controlling the tail of a plane during a gunfight, or the museum exhibit covered in bright, very destructible screens. In between the firefights and the punch-ups is stealth. You're mechanically encouraged to stay in stealth with the license to kill mechanic. Bond is only allowed to kill someone when they've shown intent to kill him, so you're not allowed to enter a room guns blazing. Technically, you can cheese the system by just running in and waiting for someone to draw on you, but if you're engaged with the narrative, then this is a corralling system to keep you in line with the tone a scene is going for. Unlike some previous iterations of Bond, this Bond doesn't necessarily enjoy killing people, and only does it when he has to. So you're narratively and mechanically encouraged to hold off on the gunfight until the tension has been built up long enough for that satisfying burst of action. Stealth is a fair bit easier than Hitman because you're much more versatile than good old 47. Another important bit of the Bond fantasy is the gadgets. Smartphone dart guns, laser straps, smoke grenade lighters, and most importantly the Q-Watch, which functions pretty much exactly like the hacking mechanic in the Watch Dogs series. If there's an electrical device, you can hack it from a distance to distract or deal with patrolling enemies. To make sure you're never too overpowered, the gadgets are metered with a limited resource mechanic. You can only do this a couple of times before you need to find some batteries or some cleaning fluid to recharge. There's also a third currency for social interactions. If you do get caught by the guards, you usually have the option to play it off with a bluff, where James will spout some believable enough nonsense about why he's snooping around, which will buy you enough time to slip back into cover. And even then, if you can't afford the bluff but you're able to knock all the guards out before they raise the alarm or start firing guns, then you can contain the situation without alerting every guard in the area to your presence. The game wants you to succeed, it doesn't want you reloading checkpoints to try and perfectly ace the stealth. In the movies, James pretty much always gets caught at least once during his infiltrations, and a quick bluff or a quick punch to the face are his usual get-out-of-jail cards. And if it does end up as a shootout, then you'll have fun doing that too. Within these wide linear areas, the game is very good at creating these emergent movie moments. When you manage to punch out a guard, see there's a guy in the other room and think to yourself, "Oof, good job you didn't hear that." Anyway, back to work. There's only one place where the mechanics of the game feel lackluster, and that's the driving sections. They just don't feel up to par with the well-designed weightiness of the rest of the game. Cars feel a bit heavy and a bit floaty at the same time, and the set pieces don't capture the same franticness as the rest of the game. It's a minor nitpick overall, and there aren't that many driving segments in the game, just enough to get the vibe right. My favourite parts of the game are the slow parts, the parts where the game gives you a big open location to explore. The game has a wonderful attention to detail and casual world building as you wander about, eavesdropping on NPCs, sometimes to progress the story, but often just to hear them chat about ongoing events. IO excel at this grand, opulent level design. Big crowds full of rich idiots all tucked into a gorgeous location, completely unaware of the danger surrounding them. It's a wonderful environment for background comedy. Of course, if you're a Bond aficionado, then the chapter title is a dead giveaway that things are not going to end well. The man Bond is tailing is in fact an assassin, and in the process of trying to stop him, Monroe is killed. It's not a noble death, not a big dramatic moment. It happens off-screen. Bond finds him lying in a pool of blood, already gone. All those months of training together, living together, the camaraderie, all gone in an instant when confronted with the reality of this life. The assassin set off a bomb in the hotel that kills or critically injures all of the other recruits. Cressida is paralysed from the waist down. She may recover, but her time as a spy is over. But the other part of this life is that there's no time to mourn. So without catching even your breath, it's on to the next action sequence. A car chase down the mountains, a shootout across an airfield, a shootout in the plane, and then freediving from the plane to safety. The power of adrenaline is a running motif of the game. Adrenaline can keep you from feeling the true pain of even mortal injuries. For a time. But those wounds always catch up with you eventually. What really takes First Light to the next level is not just that it's a good Bond game, but that it's a good Bond, period. On par and in some ways surpassing the best of the Bond movies. The thing that shocked me most of all is how much I liked James Bond. James Bond has always been a larger-than-life figure. He's always cool, he's always entertaining, but rare are the Bond movies that truly make you care about his emotions or his inner world. When I was going through the movies with my friend Nathan, we had a running gag that James Bond is a sociopath. And especially for the Sean Connery version, that's almost not even a joke. He watches people he supposedly cares about die in front of him and barely flinches. He burns people alive and shrugs it off with a quippy retort. Part of what defines his coolness is how completely unflappable he is. And that's very entertaining to watch, but it doesn't make him a likeable or believable person. Different eras inject a little more into Bond. Daniel Craig's Bond especially displays a much wider range of human emotion. But I don't think any Bond has genuinely charmed me more than Patrick Gibson. Charm is a moving target, which is another reason why Bond always needs to stay contemporary. Gibson's Bond is a modern man with modern sensibilities. He's softer around the edges than previous Bonds and much more genuinely friendly. He has a smile that reaches his eyes and an enthusiasm for life that hasn't been beaten out of him. There's a difference in how his quips come across. Connery's quips are meant to make him seem cool and above it all, but time passes and now the quips come across as a bit silly. So First Light just lets Bond be a bit silly, and it's much more endearing that way. He's trying to get a rise out of people, and a sign of friendship is when other characters start joining in on the jokes. This becomes especially interesting when murder is involved. In the prologue, Bond takes his first life during a desperate struggle with a pissed-off mercenary, and it clearly shakes him a lot. But over the course of the game, he builds up a tolerance to it, and part of how he does it is by deflecting with humour. It's adrenaline. The reality of what you're doing disguised by the rush of energy when your life is on the line. But the game still takes the time to come down from that adrenaline and let reality sink in. After a few high-octane missions, you come back to the flat, still full of Monroe and Cressida's stuff. The game lets you feel their absence alongside James as he wanders around the now lifeless apartment that's far too big for just one person. The book-accurate scar is a nice touch, not just because it sets him apart from a design perspective, but because it adds vulnerability. He's not perfect, he's seen some wear and tear, but he keeps up the smile anyway. It's part of being a younger Bond. He's not yet worn down by a decade of cynicism. He cares about people, he values the lives of others. It hurts him when people around him die. It makes for a much more heroic Bond, and surprisingly the narrative doesn't punish Bond for this empathy. It makes the more interesting choice to suggest that this empathy is something that MI6 has been lacking. One of my favourite parts of the Bond movies is the office bants. There are only two people who can match Sean Connery blow for blow, and those people are Desmond Llewellyn and Lois Maxwell. The back and forth is always a highlight, but it's also such a small part of the films, at least until the latter half of the Craig era. First Light shares my enthusiasm for the supporting cast and makes them a much more prominent part of the game. A younger Bond means a younger everybody, but most importantly a younger M. M mirrors Bond. She's new, she's unproven, and she's ambitious. Bringing in Bond was her idea, so if Bond fails, he brings her down with him. M is the most different from any previous interpretation of the character, but that's because M is the character that's the most malleable. The role is to be Bond's boss, and that's a dynamic you can play with in lots of different ways. I don't think anyone will ever match Judi Dench, but First Light's M works well for the story that the game is telling. She's a little old-fashioned, and she's more politician than spy. She brings in Bond because she has a point to prove, and it's up to you to prove her right. Bond's relationship with Q is much less adversarial than usual because this is a Q who absolutely loves some classic spy nonsense. He's always dressed to impress, and he's always cooking up some wonderful new gadgets. He feels more like a mentor figure. He teaches Bond the gadgets, but also how to be suave, in a very pleasant, non-condescending way. My absolute favourite scene in the game is when Bond has to call Q to help him tie a bow tie. It's the most convoluted QuickTime event in the game, just as it is in real life, and it's such a wonderful little moment. Bond is clearly embarrassed, but Q doesn't judge. He just walks him through the steps with the calm patience of a proper gentleman. The movies would never show Bond to be this vulnerable, but allowing for some of this vulnerability is what makes him so likeable. It also makes him kind of sexy. Not in the way that men try to be sexy, but in a way that actually makes him attractive to women. I had assumed that the womanizing aspect of Bond would be a relic of the past, but in First Light, Bond hooks up with multiple attractive women. I didn't realise that all it takes is a subtle change to turn the womanizing from a dated sexist mess into a delightful character trait that everyone can enjoy. Bond has always been a masculine fantasy figure, and part of that fantasy has always been sexual aggression. He's powerful. He doesn't just sleep with women, he has power over them. He dominates them, in a way that blurs the lines of consent way more than is really comfortable. But can you keep that masculine sexuality without the accompanying misogyny? Yeah, you can. It's as simple as showing that the women are interested in Bond, not in the instantly falling in love way that some of the older movies portrayed, but in the I want to jump this guy kind of way, and showing that Bond is genuinely interested in them as people and not as objects or conquests. Having Bond sit there and smile sincerely as the sexy climate scientist explains her work. That really is all you need. Respect. Bond's hookups in First Light are not a signifier of his masculine power. The women are not subtextually shamed for their open sexuality. He just likes attractive women, they like him too, and the sex is nothing but mutual fun. The game includes a counterexample in the same mission with Teresa the Sexy Botanist. One of the other people Bond is there to protect is a dude bro douchebag who acts more like how Bond traditionally acts towards women, a drunk chauvinist playboy. He does view sex as a kind of conquest, saying it's like shooting fish in a barrel here at the resort. He also has the hots for Teresa and figures he's in there despite not even bothering to learn her name, because he's an asshole, and Bond thinks so too. For the first time in his entire career, Bond respects women, and there's no greater showcase of that than his relationship with Moneypenny. I like what First Light does with Moneypenny most of all. She's no longer just the sassy secretary, but also not a secret badass like Naomi Harris's version of the character. She's the gal in the chair, the Diana to Bond's 47, with you each step of the way and offering a helping hand behind the scenes. It feels like such a natural fit for the character that I can't believe it took us 60 years to get here. Moneypenny is fun in the original films because she's the only woman on the planet who is immune to Bond's bullshit. She knows him too well to be taken in by him. And Lois Maxwell always did an incredible job of threading that line between genuine attraction and intellectual understanding. There is real chemistry between them, but she's far too smart to ever act on it. It's a fun dynamic. In First Light though, Bond and Moneypenny feel like real friends. They have such natural chemistry as they bounce off each other as partners for most of the story. They playfully pick on each other, they laugh at each other's jokes, they worry about each other, and they trust each other. It makes for such good romantic tension. I think an underrated part of Hitman, but one that I've always loved, is the relationship between Diana and 47. It's such a wonderfully intricate dynamic. She's a shady person, but she's also the only person in the world that 47 trusts. He's a blank slate, he doesn't know right from wrong, so he trusts her to be his moral core. It's a level of trust that's intimate enough to be romantic, but they never take you over that line, always sizzling but never bubbling over. It's clearly a dynamic that the writers at IO like too, and I honestly think it works even better for Bond and Moneypenny because Bond is a much more normal man than 47. It's an inversion of the normal Bond-Moneypenny dynamic where flirting is just a game they play. In First Light, the flirting feels more accidental, a consequence of actually liking each other. It's a dynamic born from the fact that Bond is no longer a misogynist. He actually respects Moneypenny as a peer. And as such, this is the only Bond I can imagine having a real relationship with someone, including the Bonds who've had real relationships. Sorry, George, I'd have given your marriage 3 months even if she wasn't murdered. It's fascinating to me how little the changes are that make this Bond so much more likeable and empathetic. The core of the character is still the same. He's still handsome, dashing, scarily good at killing people. It's all the small details that make him feel much more human. And that, more than anything, is why M wanted him on the team. The Bond movies have always represented the anxieties of the era they were made in. Connery spent a lot of time disarming nuclear bombs and trying to avert rising tensions between Western powers and the USSR. Brosnan fought in a world increasingly controlled by computers in the ways that they can be manipulated by those in the know. And of course, who could forget the time Timothy Dalton joined forces with the brave brothers of the Mujahideen? So what is the anxiety of 2026? Well, it would have to be the broken chatbots infiltrating every aspect of our lives because a bunch of delusional tech bros think they've built God. As if the game could be any more targeted at me, the whole narrative of First Light is explicitly anti-AI, which in an industry that's increasingly trying to shove that shit down our throats is so cathartic. 10 years ago, MI6 installed a supercomputer in their basement. Thea, on loan from the defense and AI research conglomerate Webb Industries. Thea has revolutionized the intelligence industry and rendered the 00 program obsolete. After all, what's the use of squishy, fallible human agents when Thea can handle everything? That was the logic of M's predecessors when they shut down the program, but M has her doubts. She still believes in things like human intuition, probably because she has some of it herself. The inciting incident of the game is a botched operation in Iceland in which a young air crewman Bond is the only survivor. While infiltrating the base, Bond discovers some surviving scientists and decides to try and rescue them. Thea gives him a less than 1% chance of success, but he pulls it off, which is the first sign that things are amiss. The conspiracy that Bond and his grumpy mentor Greenway get wrapped up in is that Thea makes mistakes. It's been making mistakes for 10 years. MI6 fed it all the data in the world, and for 10 years it's been identifying ghost patterns, predicting attacks that didn't happen, calling innocent parties guilty, ordering hits on the wrong people. And for 10 years, Sir Nicholas Webb and his son have been covering it up, changing reality to match Thea's faulty analysis by planting evidence and staging scenes and launching false flag attacks. When confronted about it, Sir Nicholas gives such a familiar defense. Thea is in its infancy. It needs practice to achieve perfection. People are too intolerant of machines and the way they learn. It's the obvious flaws in his rationale and the open hypocrisy between his words and actions that make Webb such a realistic villain. It's been screwing up for 10 years and shows no signs of changing because the technology is fundamentally flawed. But the man has deluded himself that he's built the God Machine. This is, after all, the man who proudly displays AI-generated artwork of Rocco's basilisk in his office. He's also one of the richest and most powerful people on the planet and has practically infinite money to will his delusions into reality. When you try and expose what he's done, he simply blackmails the government with all the classified data they've given him free access to so that he can keep doing whatever he wants. Much like real tech billionaires, Webb is not a pleasant or charismatic man, and yet thanks to his money and power he's developed a bizarre cult of personality around him. People who see him as a visionary. People who will follow him to a secret base in Antarctica even after he's been declared a terrorist by the British government. People who assume that he must have a plan, right? And he does. He asked his chatbot to generate a plan to topple the British government for him. Bond's role in this story is not that he's the smartest or the most skilled or the luckiest. His true power is that he doesn't accept a flawed status quo. Thea has made MI6 complacent. They didn't discover what Webb was up to because they never bothered to look. Webb sold them a lie and they bought it without looking into it because on the surface it seemed like it was doing everything it was supposed to. This is the trap that so many AI evangelists fall into. The thing looks like it's working, that must mean it's actually working. ChatGPT will spit out facts and misinformation in the exact same tone, and if you don't think to double check, you could very easily be suckered in by it. Bond's human intuition and rebellious spirit, his willingness to question the facts, is what pulls the wool away from MI6's eyes. And that's reflected most of all in John Greenway. Greenway is such a great character. He starts off as a real hard-ass prick who doesn't like Bond at all for what he perceives as a lack of professionalism and care. Greenway used to be a 00 himself, but he spent 10 years behind a desk thanks to Thea. 10 years ago, Thea flagged a mole ring in MI6. 3 00 agents who were selling secrets, and Greenway was dispatched to take them down. His own friends and co-workers. It hardened him, made him bitter, resentful, immune to trust, and it was all a lie. There was no mole ring. Thea got it wrong, and Greenway put down his trusted colleagues based on the faulty predictions of a broken machine. It's a hell of a truth to face, but it's also the kick Greenway needs to come back to himself. Working with Bond helps heal Greenway, because deep down, despite all his bitterness and old man grumpiness, he loves this job, he loves this life, and Bond reminds him of why. The rush of adrenaline when your life is on the line, the glamour, the intrigue, the quips. Greenway can quip with the best of them, he just hasn't felt the desire to for years. The first light in his eyes for a decade. For 10 years, they've told him he's redundant, a relic of the past, easily replaced by technology, but the fuckers were wrong. They were wrong from the very beginning, and that revelation is freeing. It's just too bad about that life expectancy. Greenway takes a hard bullet. It doesn't seem like a fatal hit at the time, but those are the wonders of adrenaline. He asks Bond not to let it change him. Not just his death, but this life. Don't let cynicism take hold. Don't let that light go out. Metatextually, it's passing the torch. Lenny James is similar ages with Daniel Craig, and the character is mired in the same kind of dark cynicism that defined Craig's take on Bond. But that era is past. The cynical, drunk killing machine is not the hero we need right now. In the age of AI, it's our humanity that gives us strength. It's our empathy, our passion, and our heart that will carry us forward. As in Bond, so too in life. We tried cynicism for 20 years and it doesn't work. It's time to try something new. Cynicism is a lie sold to us by people who benefit from our misery. People who want us to turn our thinking over to machines and isolate us from one another and force us to give up the parts of ourselves that make us human in the name of efficiency and perfection. Screw that. Sure, we have a softer Bond. A Bond who cares about his friends and doesn't shoot first. But maybe that's the harder path. Maybe holding on to your humanity and not letting life change you is the greater struggle. Maybe a Bond who cries is a Bond we need. It doesn't have to be that way. In fact, there's 2 examples within the story of how easy it is to get that balance wrong. Damian Webb is a sociopath. Violent, petulant, and extremely dangerous. He's as much a warning about the wonders of adrenaline as anything else. If you live in that high for too long, you might forget to come back down again. Damian is never more alive than in those moments teetering between life and death. When Bond quips and jabs, Damian doesn't get annoyed or shake it off. He laughs along with them. A genuine, horrifying laugh. He loves it. He sees in Bond a peer, someone who thrives in that glorious struggle for life like he does. He is total nihilism. He does not care about his father's posturing or his noble intentions. He knows they're doing bad work. He just doesn't care as long as he can keep living this life. This is what happens when you stop caring. A monster driven only by the maddening struggle to see tomorrow. On the opposite end is Isla Vale, real name unknown. Isla is the biggest thread left hanging by the end of the game. She pops up throughout the story, but the more you learn about her, the more mysterious she gets. She has no name, she has no backstory, she has no allegiance, she has no emotion. These things have all been stripped away to turn her into the perfect spy. She spins a story about being personally wronged by the Webbs, but it's pure fiction, just a tale to convince Bond to work with her. All she's ever been after is the giant pile of blackmail material. For what purpose? Probably Spectre, but the game doesn't name any names yet. There's no hard feelings, there's no attachment, this is just business. It's very close to Bond's characterization back in the Connery days. The smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the charm that's just a tool to get what you need to complete the mission. The sort of person the tradition dictates spies are supposed to be. But as the game puts it earlier on, that's a great way to stay alive, but it's no way to live. To truly live, you have to feel, you have to ride the roller coaster through the highs and the lows. And despite all her attempts otherwise, to truly shut out those emotions is impossible. In the end, she chooses to save Bond. She doesn't have to, it's probably detrimental to her mission to do it, but she just can't help herself, because she's human. And despite herself, she likes him, and she knows he's a good man who doesn't deserve to die, not when she can do something about it. That's what it means to be human. It's why organisations like MI6 need to stay human. A true machine, like Thea, can only do what it's been told. People can do what's right. I don't know what the old Bonds would think about that, but I'd like to believe that they'd all jump in that pool, like Isla, like Greenway. That they'd see in this new Bond a new approach, a better approach. That behind the boyish smirk and naive optimism, they'd see something worth holding on to, and a future worth fighting for. The game has a deft hand for weaving in that legacy. There are plenty of little Easter eggs, lines of dialogue. There's a whole chain of collectibles which are little throwbacks to old Bond movies. But the game also knows how to play those callbacks for the emotional weight they hold, like All the Time in the World, or how the game uses the On Her Majesty's Secret Service motif during a big action set piece with Greenway, a reminder of all the things John loves about this life. But the game also knows when to be its own thing. They made the wise choice to give this Bond a signature look, his sweet jacket, which I'm sure I'll be seeing in Bond games 40 years from now. It also has a song, not in the, oh, the video game did a Bond song, that's cute sort of way, like some of the previous games. No, they brought in Lana Del Rey to make an absolute banger. It feels like a milestone of where games are culturally. This is not a James Bond game, this is James Bond. It does not seek to emulate the movies, it seeks to compete, it seeks to surpass, and I can't wait to see more. There are plenty of open threads that the story could follow, although Amazon looms like a spectre over the series' future. I can't imagine they were too happy with the blatant anti-AI message of the game, but such is Amazon's whole deal with The Boys and Fallout and the like. They don't care if we hate them as long as they can keep making money. Still, I'm optimistic. First Light is a wonderful, wonderful game. The kind of game that reminds me why I love this medium so much in the first place. It's all well and good to watch Bond, to glimpse into his world, but it's another thing entirely to be Bond, to live that life with him, to know him in a way that a movie or a book could never capture. There's nothing else like it. I suppose, when it comes to James Bond, nobody does it better. for watching, and a very special thank you to my wonderful patrons for your continued support. If you'd like to see your name up here, or just support the things that I do, then please consider signing up, it would mean a lot to me. As well as a like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. You may or may not have noticed, but I deliberately avoided using the words GoldenEye at any point in this video, because it always annoys me that every single Bond game for the rest of eternity has to be compared to GoldenEye. But in saying that, I did make a video about GoldenEye last year, which you can find up here. Or if you want to hear me and my friend Nathan go through all of the Bond movies, then you can find that in this podcast down here.